In this unit, we will talk about thermochemistry. Although the word thermal often implies heat, we will expand this concept further and we'll talk about all forms of energy. In this first video, we'll talk about the sources of energy and how we use it in everyday life. Most of the energy on Earth comes from the sun. The sun's energy is derived from the fusion of hydrogen atoms into helium atoms. You will study that further in Physics 30 or Science 30. This fusion reaction creates a lot of heat, and this heat is radiated as infrared, visible, UV radiation that reaches the Earth, but also as well as gamma rays that does not reach the Earth's surface. From the radiation of the sun, plants absorb this energy through photosynthesis to generate glucose, and this glucose energy is eventually converted to petroleum and fossil fuels. Other energy hitting the Earth's surface heats the Earth and evaporates the water. This water then rises into the atmosphere, condenses into clouds, and rains on mountains and lakes. This creates gravitational potential energy for sources of water that humans can use in the form of hydroelectric dams to generate electricity. This slide is a continuation of the previous slide. On the right-hand side, we had fossil fuel chemical energy. We can use it in combustion in our cars and thermoelectrical plants, and this creates kinetic energy, which moves our car, as well as a lot of friction or heat. On the left-hand side of the page, we talked about the gravitational potential energy of water that can drive turbines in hydroelectric dams, which can create electrical energy in the generator. This then powers our home through lights and TV, but as well, a lot of energy is wasted as thermal energy or as heat. Now you notice that on both sides, the end product is thermal energy, friction, or heat, because most energy transformations on Earth is not 100% efficient and generates heat as a waste byproduct. As mentioned earlier, photosynthesis is the major way that plants convert solar energy from the sun into chemical energy in the forms of glucose. This happens in the chloroplast of the plant using the chlorophyll molecule. And as you recall, the chlorophyll molecule basically traps the energy photons from the sun to excite electrons, and it transfers that excited electron into carbon dioxide and water to generate glucose. A much simplified reaction equation is 6 carbon dioxide react with 6 water plus solar energy to form 6 glucose and 1 sugar molecule. In this case, plants generate glucose, but then that glucose can be converted into other carbohydrates, and the carbohydrate is then stored in the stem or in the roots of the plant. This energy is then eaten by other animals like humans or deer or cow, and is either used by their cells for everyday living or stored for future use. The opposite of photosynthesis is cell respiration. In this reaction, the plant cells or the animal cells break down the glucose along with oxygen molecules to produce carbon dioxide and water, along with many molecules of ATP, which then the cell uses to provide energy for its cellular functions. Remember, cell respiration is the exact opposite of photosynthesis. The products of photosynthesis are the reactants in cell respiration, and the products of cell respiration are the reactants for photosynthesis. The other type of major energy stored on Earth is fossil fuels. The currently accepted hypothesis for how fossil fuel is made is called the biogenic hypothesis. Again, it's a bio because it is converted from biological molecules. The hypothesis states that energy is first captured and stored by photosynthesis in plants. The energy is either kept by the plants or transferred to animals that eat the plant. However, when both the plant and the animals die, they decompose, and after a long time, under temperature conditions and high pressures, they will convert it into hydrocarbons. Ultimately, the source of energy for the formation of hydrocarbon is the sun. It is important to remember that fossil fuels are considered non-renewable resources because it takes a really long time for the process to occur. Next, let's talk about two types of energetic reactions. The first type is called an exothermic reaction. Here, the energy is released into the surroundings, so into the air or into the water that surrounds the chemical reaction. You can consider energy as a product in an exothermic reaction. Often, the environment will become hotter. In an endothermic reaction, the reaction absorbs energy from the environment. Here, you can consider the energy as a reactant. The environment will often feel cooler after the reaction has happened because it has lost energy to the chemical reaction. Remember, energy will always go from hot places to cold places. In reality, though, you can think of hot environments as places where there is higher kinetic energy and cold places where there is lower kinetic energy. This will occur until a thermal equilibrium is reached. That means both the substances have the same temperature. Some examples of exothermic reactions occurs in your furnace. Here, you convert chemical energy in the form of natural gas, and you can generate heat. Similarly, in a firefly, it converts glucose energy into light, along with some heat loss as well. When a battery is charged, it converts potential energy from, let's say, a hydroelectrical dam into electrical energy, but it also generates a lot of heat. And you can feel it because when your cell phone charges, it gets warm. And lastly, a car engine converts chemical energy in terms of fossil fuels into mechanical energy, and also this process generates a lot of waste heat. So therefore, it is an exothermic reaction. Now let's talk about some endothermic reaction. In cooking, heat is required to transform the food into a more edible product. Heat is placed into the food to cook it. In electrolysis, we convert water into hydrogen and oxygen gas, and we have to input electrical energy, so therefore it can be considered an endothermic reaction. In photosynthesis, the reactants absorb energy from the environment in the form of light, so therefore it's considered endothermic. And lastly, in generation of ammonia, a lot of electrical energy is required to convert nitrogen gas and hydrogen gas into ammonia. Even though reactions can seem to be endothermic or exothermic, we must remember the law of conservation of energy applies. This law states that energy can neither be created nor destroyed in a chemical or physical reaction. If one system gains energy, another system must lose energy. Or you can think of it as energy can be converted from one form and another. If you're eating something, you convert the chemical energy of food into mechanical energy of motion. Similarly, in photosynthesis, plants convert radiant solar energy into chemical energy. And in a car, chemical energy in gasoline is converted to kinetic energy of cars. And lastly, electrical energy is converted to thermal energy in an oven or a toaster. So when we study energy, we have to study it in an isolated system where neither matter nor energy can move in or out. This is opposed to or different from an open system where both energy and matter can move across barriers. In Chemistry 30, we'll be studying reactions in the isolated system. Let's talk about kinetic energy and potential energy in terms of chemistry. In physics, we say kinetic energy is of energy of motion, whereas potential energy is based on an object's height or its elastic potential. However, in chemistry, kinetic energy we refer to it the molecule's speed. So the molecules are still moving, and moving objects have kinetic energy. If the temperature is cooler, lower temperature, that means that the molecules are vibrating or moving slower. As for potential energy, in chemistry, we say that an object changes potential energy when it changes phase, for example, from a gas to a liquid, or a change in a chemical composition, such as a chemical reaction. For example, let's look at carbon-hydrogen bonds versus carbon-oxygen bonds. You'll know from your biology courses that carbon-hydrogen bonds in the form of carbohydrate have much higher energy than carbon-oxygen bonds in terms of carbon dioxide. Therefore, there is more energy, more potential energy in carbon-hydrogen bonds than there are then in carbon-oxygen bonds. Now, you have to remember, during a change in kinetic energy, there is no potential energy change happening. So we can remember that when a temperature of a glass of water decreases, the molecules are vibrating slower. That is, their kinetic energy is decreasing. However, there is no phase change. There is no phase change, so there is no change in potential energy. The difference between kinetic energy and potential energy in terms of chemistry also leads us to differentiate between heat and temperature. In everyday conversation, it's common to interchange the words heat with temperature. However, in chemistry, heat is not temperature. Temperature is the average kinetic energy of all the molecules found in a particular substance. If a beaker of water had 100 molecules of water in it, then you would have to determine the energy of all those molecules of water and then average them out. So again, remember, temperature is a measurement of the substance's molecules' kinetic energy. On the other hand, heat, or chemically known as enthalpy, is the total kinetic, so movement energy, and potential energy of the molecules in the system at a constant pressure. We use the symbol big H to symbolize enthalpy, and remember, enthalpy is kinetic energy and potential energy. To summarize, energy can be found in different forms. It can be found in forms of heat or enthalpy, chemical energy found within bonds such as carbon-hydrogen bonds, mechanical energy such as the energy of movement, and electrical energy found in batteries, for example. A couple more terms we need to be aware of. One of them is the enthalpy of reaction. This is the energy change for the whole chemical system, products and reactants, when reactants change to products. This number will be negative for exothermic reactions because the products will contain less energy than the reactants. Therefore, there's a negative change in enthalpy. And the enthalpy of the reaction will be positive for endothermic reaction because the products will have more energy than the reactants. We can also show this in a reaction path or a reaction coordinate diagram. On the left-hand side of the reaction path, here we have the reactants. If the energy drops from the reactant to the products, there is a negative change. The product has less energy than the reactants, therefore it must have left the reaction as heat. Therefore this is an exothermic reaction. On the other hand, here we have an endothermic reaction. The products have a higher enthalpy than the reactants. Therefore energy must have absorbed from the surroundings into the chemical system. You should also be aware of the term reaction path. Normally in science, in the x-axis, we have the manipulated variable. However, this is not a manipulated variable. You can think of it as a time for a reaction, but you should also be aware that the term reaction path can also be used synonymously with reaction progress or reaction coordinates.